It was a conflict where Cold War relics clashed with the cutting edge of modern stealth. From domestic legends to foreign interceptors, here is every aircraft used in the Yugoslavian War. Let's begin with fighter and interceptor aircraft. Dassault Mirage 2000C. France deployed this fighter to enforce the no-fly zone over Bosnia, flying air defense patrols from Italian bases throughout Operation Deny Flight. Then, General Dynamics F-16 Fighting Falcon, the most numerous NATO fighter over the former Yugoslavia. It enforced no-fly zones, escorted bombers, and flew strike missions throughout Operation Allied Force. Grumman F-14 Tomcat. Operating from carriers in the Adriatic, this heavy interceptor patrolled Bosnian airspace and flew reconnaissance missions throughout the Yugoslav conflicts. McDonnell Douglas FA-18 Hornet. Navy and Marine aviators flew this multi-role jet from Adriatic carriers throughout the Yugoslav conflicts, conducting both strike and air defense missions over the Balkans. Next, McDonnell Douglas F-15C Eagle. Deployed to enforce NATO no-fly zones over Bosnia and Kosovo, it kept Yugoslav Air Force fighters from operating freely throughout the conflicts. Mikoyan MiG-29. The Yugoslav Air Force's most modern fighter during Operation Allied Force. NATO pilots shot down multiple examples during the 1999 Kosovo air campaign. Mikoyan Gurovic MiG-21, still the backbone of several Yugoslav successor air forces throughout the 1990s conflicts. Outmatched by NATO opponents, but present until the very end. Panavia Tornado ADV. The Royal Air Force deployed this long-range interceptor to Italy to enforce no-fly zones over Bosnia during the early 1990s Balkan operations. Continuing with ground attack and strike aircraft. AMX International. AMX, Italian Air Force. Rafale jets flew strike missions during Operation Allied Force in 1999, operating from Italian bases a short distance from the Yugoslav border. Up next, British Aerospace Harrier GR7. Royal Air Force Harriers flew precision strike missions during Operation Allied Force from Italian bases, delivering laser-guided bombs against Serbian targets in Kosovo. Now this is the British Aerospace Sea Harrier FA-2. Flying from HMS Invincible in the Adriatic, this naval variant provided air defence cover for British forces operating over the former Yugoslavia. Next, British Aerospace Sea Harrier FRS-1. The earlier naval variant flew Adriatic patrols during the Bosnian crisis, before being supplemented and eventually replaced by the more capable FA-2 version. Dassault Étendard 4. French Navy crews flew this carrier-based aircraft on reconnaissance missions over the former Yugoslavia from the carrier Foch, operating in the Adriatic. Up next, Dassault Mirage 2000D. French Air Force crews flew precision night strikes against Serbian targets during Operation Allied Force, delivering laser-guided weapons against infrastructure across Serbia. The next one, Dassault Mirage F1CR. French reconnaissance crews flew this fast variant over the former Yugoslavia throughout the Bosnian and Kosovo conflicts, providing intelligence for coalition planning. Now this is the Dassault Mirage F1CT. French Air Force strike crews flew this tactical variant on ground attack missions during Operation Allied Force against Serbian military targets in Kosovo and Serbia. Dassault Super Étendard. Operating from the French carrier Foch in the Adriatic, this naval strike aircraft flew missions over Bosnia during the 1990s Balkan intervention. Next, Fairchild Republic A-10 Thunderbolt II. This aircraft hunted Serbian armor hiding in Kosovo's forests and valleys during Operation Allied Force, proving its tank-killing ability remained as relevant as ever. Then, Lockheed AC-130. Operating over Bosnia at night, this gunship provided devastating fire support for UN peacekeepers and later NATO ground forces throughout the Bosnian intervention. Lockheed F-117A Nighthawk. The Yugoslav conflicts produced the only combat loss of this stealth aircraft, when Serbian air defences shot one down over Bosnia during Operation Allied Force in 1999. McDonnell Douglas F-15E Strike Eagle. Flying from bases in Britain and Italy, this heavy strike aircraft attacked Serbian command facilities, airfields, and military infrastructure throughout Operation Allied Force. Then McDonnell Douglas F-4G Phantom II. The last operational Wild Weasel variant flew its final combat missions during Operation Allied Force, suppressing Serbian air defences before being retired from US service. Panavia Tornado ECR, German and Italian Tornado ECR crews flew suppression of enemy air defence missions during Operation Allied Force, targeting Serbian radar systems across the country. Panavia Tornado IDS, British, German and Italian strike crews flew this low-level attack aircraft against Serbian military targets throughout Operation Allied Force's 78-day air campaign. Sepicat Jaguar. British and French Jaguar crews flew strike missions over Bosnia during Operation Deliberate Force in 1995, attacking Bosnian Serb military positions around Sarajevo. Next, Soko J-20 Kraguj. This piston-engined light attack aircraft served Croatian and other successor state air forces during the early Yugoslav Wars, before jet aircraft became more available. Soko J-21 Yastreb. Yugoslav successor air forces flew this domestically built jet throughout the conflicts of the 1990s for ground attack and light strike missions. Then Soko J-22 Arau, the joint Yugoslav and Romanian designed strike aircraft, saw combat with Serbian forces during the Yugoslav Wars and remained in Serbian Air Force service through Allied force. Moving on to bomber aircraft. Boeing B-52 Stratofortress. Flying from RAF Fairford in Britain, this bomber struck Serbian targets during Operation Allied Force, its first European combat missions since the Cold War ended. Next, Northrop Grumman B-2 Spirit. Operation Allied Force marked the combat debut of this stealth bomber. Flying from Missouri, it struck Serbian targets and accidentally bombed the Chinese embassy in Belgrade. Rockwell B-1B Lancer. Operation Allied Force was this supersonic bomber's combat debut. It flew missions from bases in Britain against Serbian military targets throughout the Kosovo campaign. Now let's look at reconnaissance, surveillance and AWACS aircraft. Boeing E-3 Sentry, NATO E-3s, managed the complex air picture over the former Yugoslavia throughout every phase of the Balkan interventions, from deny flight through Allied force. The next one, Boeing RC-135. This signals intelligence aircraft monitored Serbian military communications throughout the Yugoslav conflicts, providing intelligence that shaped NATO strike planning. Next, Breguet Atlantic. French Navy Atlantics patrolled the Adriatic Sea throughout the Bosnian and Kosovo conflicts, monitoring Yugoslav naval activity and supporting the arms embargo enforcement. The next one, Dassault Mirage 4P, converted from its original nuclear strike role, this fast reconnaissance variant photographed Serbian military positions throughout the French contribution to Balkan operations. Up next, Grumman E-2 Hawkeye. Operating from carriers in the Adriatic, this airborne early warning aircraft managed the air picture for US Navy strike groups throughout the Yugoslav conflicts. Lockheed P-3 Orion. NATO P-3 crews enforced the arms embargo against the former Yugoslavia from the Adriatic, monitoring shipping throughout the long Bosnian conflict. Lockheed U-2S. Flying above Serbian air defences, this high-altitude reconnaissance aircraft photographed military positions across the former Yugoslavia throughout the NATO intervention. Then, Northrop Grumman E-8 Joint Stars. This ground surveillance aircraft tracked Serbian armour movements during Operation Allied Force, helping NATO commanders understand Serbian ground force dispositions in Kosovo. Soko IJ-21 Yastreb. The two-seat trainer version of the Yastreb was used for reconnaissance by Yugoslav successor air forces throughout the 1990s Balkan conflicts. Soko IJ-22 Oral. The reconnaissance variant of this domestically built Yugoslav jet gathered intelligence for Serbian forces during the conflicts that followed the Federation's collapse. Now let's look at electronic warfare and psychological operations aircraft. General Dynamics EF-111A Raven. Flying ahead of NATO strike packages during Operation Allied Force, this dedicated jammer suppressed Serbian air defense radars throughout the Kosovo air campaign. Grumman EA-6B Prowler. Every NATO strike package during Allied Force included this aircraft jamming Serbian radar. Without it, Serbian air defences would have posed a far greater threat. Up next, Lockheed EC-130. This aircraft broadcast radio and television signals into Serbia during Operation Allied Force, bypassing state-controlled media to reach the Serbian population directly. Lockheed EP-3. Navy signals intelligence crews flew this aircraft along the Yugoslav periphery throughout the conflicts, intercepting Serbian military communications to support NATO planning. Let's move on to transport, tanker, and utility aircraft. Antonov An-12. Yugoslav successor states inherited and operated this Soviet transport during the conflicts. It moved equipment and personnel throughout the deteriorating Federation's territory. The next one, Antonov An-2. This biplane was used for improvised night bombing runs during the early Yugoslav Wars, dropping crude bombs from low altitude against enemy positions. Up next, Antonov An-26. Croatian, Serbian, and Bosnian forces all operated inherited examples of this Soviet transport throughout the Yugoslav Wars for interbase logistics. Antonov An-32. Some Yugoslav successor air forces operated this high-performance Soviet transport throughout the conflicts, using its mountain airfield capability in the Balkan terrain. Boeing C-17 Globemaster III. This aircraft delivered NATO troops and equipment directly into Balkan airfields during I-4 and S-4 peacekeeping deployments following the Dayton Agreement. Boeing KC-135 Stratotanker. Without this aircraft flying continuous refueling orbits over the Adriatic and Italy, Operation Allied Forces' sustained 78-day air campaign was not possible. Then, Canadair CL-215. Croatian forces operated this amphibious aircraft during the Yugoslav Wars, using its water landing capability in the Adriatic coastal regions of the conflict. Let L-410 Turbolet. Several Yugoslav successor air forces inherited and operated this Czechoslovak light transport throughout the 1990s conflicts for interbase movement. Lockheed C-130 Hercules, the workhorse of humanitarian operations into Sarajevo during the siege and NATO peacekeeping deployments throughout every phase of the Balkan conflict. Lockheed C-141 Starlifter. This long-range transport moved NATO troops and equipment to staging bases in Italy and Hungary for the Bosnian and Kosovo peacekeeping deployments. Lockheed C-5 Galaxy. This strategic airlifter moved the heaviest NATO equipment to European bases, staging the Balkan peacekeeping deployments that followed the Dayton and Kumanovo agreements. The next one, Lockheed L-1011 TriStar. The Royal Air Force used converted examples to refuel British strike aircraft and transport personnel throughout the Bosnian and Kosovo operations from British and Italian bases. McDonnell Douglas KC-10 Extender. This tanker refueled NATO strike aircraft throughout Allied force, carrying both fuel and cargo on missions that sustained the 78-day bombing campaign. Then, PZL M18 Dromeda. Croatian forces converted this agricultural aircraft for improvised light attack and transport duties during the early desperate phase of the Croatian War of Independence. Now this is the Transall C-160. French and German Transals delivered humanitarian supplies and NATO military equipment throughout the Bosnian conflict and Kosovo peacekeeping operations. Then Vickers VC-10. The Royal Air Force used this tanker to refuel British Harriers and Tornadoes, flying strike missions over the former Yugoslavia during Operation Allied Force. Yakovlev Yak-40. Yugoslav successor states inherited this Soviet light jet transport and operated it throughout the conflicts for command liaison and interbase passenger movement. Next on the list is trainer and light attack aircraft. Pilatus PC-9. Croatian forces used this Swiss turboprop trainer in light attack and close air support roles during the Croatian War of Independence, when jet aircraft was scarce. Soko G to Galeb. This domestically built Yugoslav trainer was used by multiple successor air forces for light attack missions throughout the conflicts that followed the Federation's collapse. Soko G4 Super Galeb. Serbian forces flew this improved Yugoslav jet trainer in light attack roles during Allied force. NATO aircraft shot down at least one during the Kosovo campaign. UTVA-66. This Yugoslav utility aircraft served with multiple successor state air forces throughout the conflicts for liaison and light transport in the mountainous Balkan terrain. UTVA-75. This basic Yugoslav trainer was pressed into observation and liaison duties by successor state air forces during the desperate early phases of the Yugoslav Wars. Continuing with attack helicopters. Mi-24 Yugoslav Air Force gunships flew combat missions during the Croatian and Bosnian Wars. Their presence over Vukovar and Sarajevo became defining images of the conflict. Soko SA-342 GAMA, Yugoslav forces operated this anti-tank helicopter variant throughout the Bosnian conflict, using it to attack ground forces and armoured vehicles across the Balkan terrain. Continuing with transport, utility and search and rescue helicopters, Aerospatiale SA-330 Puma. UN and NATO peacekeeping forces used this helicopter extensively throughout Bosnia and Kosovo for troop movement and logistics across the difficult Balkan terrain. Next, Augusta Bell AB-212. Italian and other NATO forces operated this twin-engine helicopter throughout the Yugoslav conflicts for liaison, search and rescue, and light transport missions. Now this is the Bell 206 Jet Ranger. Yugoslav successor. Armed forces used this light helicopter for observation and command liaison throughout the various conflicts of the 1990s Balkan Wars. Bell 412. NATO peacekeeping forces and several Yugoslav successor states operated this medium helicopter for troop transport and logistics throughout the Bosnian and Kosovo operations. Now this is the Bell UH-1 Iroquois. Yugoslav successor air forces inherited large fleets of this helicopter and flew it throughout the wars. UN peacekeepers also operated it across Bosnia. Boeing CH-47 Chinook, NATO peacekeeping forces relied on this heavy-lift helicopter to move artillery and supplies to remote mountain positions throughout Bosnia and Kosovo after the ceasefires. Now this is the Eurocopter AS-332 Super Puma. French UNPROFOR and later I-4 forces operated this helicopter throughout Bosnia for heavy transport and search and rescue during the Balkan peacekeeping missions. Hughes MD-500, Croatian and other successor state forces operated this compact helicopter for observation and liaison during the various conflicts of the Yugoslav Wars. Kamov Kar-25. Yugoslav Navy operated this coaxial naval helicopter for Adriatic coastal defense throughout the conflicts before the fleet fragmented among the successor states. Kamov Kar-28. The Yugoslav Navy operated this improved coaxial helicopter for anti-submarine duties in the Adriatic, before naval assets were divided among the Yugoslav successor states. MiG-14. Yugoslav Navy crews flew this amphibious helicopter over the Adriatic for anti-submarine patrol before the fleet was fragmented by the Federation's collapse. MiG-17. The standard medium transport helicopter across multiple Yugoslav successor air forces throughout the 1990s conflicts, inherited from the former federal inventory. MiG-8. The most common helicopter on every side of the Yugoslav Wars. Serbian, Croatian, Bosnian and Slovenian forces all inherited and operated examples from the federal fleet. The next one, Sikorsky MH-53 Pave Low. US Special Operations crews used this helicopter to support downed pilot recovery during Operation Allied Force and to insert teams throughout the Kosovo campaign. Then, Sikorsky MH-60 Pave Hawk, US crews flew this helicopter into Serbia to recover the pilot of the F-117 shot down during Allied Force, one of the most dramatic rescues of the conflict. Then, Sikorsky UH-60 Black Hawk. US Army peacekeepers deployed this helicopter throughout Bosnia and Kosovo following the ceasefires, using it for patrol and logistics across the former conflict zones. Soko SA-341 Hera. This locally built Yugoslav helicopter served with multiple successor air forces throughout the 1990s, used for observation and liaison across the Balkans. Westland Lynx. British forces deployed this helicopter throughout the Bosnian and Kosovo peacekeeping operations for reconnaissance, liaison, and anti-armor support from forward bases. Westland Sea King. Royal Navy Sea Kings operated from HMS Invincible in the Adriatic throughout the Bosnian crisis, conducting search and rescue and heavy lift for British forces. Moving on to unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs. Canadair CL-289. French and German forces used this reconnaissance drone over Bosnia during UNPROFOR operations, gathering imagery of Bosnian Serb positions around besieged towns. General Atomics RQ-1 Predator. The Yugoslav conflicts were this drone's operational debut. It provided persistent surveillance over Bosnia and Kosovo that changed how NATO commanders tracked Serbian forces. The next one, IAI RQ-5 Hunter. US Army Hunter drones flew surveillance missions over Bosnia during I-4 peacekeeping, locating artillery and monitoring compliance with the Dayton Agreement. Up next, Sajem Kresserel, French forces deployed this catapult-launched drone over Bosnia during UNPROFOR operations to monitor Bosnian Serb military activity around Sarajevo and other enclaves, ending with civilian aircraft used in combat support roles. Cessna 172, Croatian and Bosnian forces used commandeered civilian aircraft, including this type, for observation and courier duties during the desperate early phase of the Yugoslav Wars. Now this is the Cessna 188. Agricultural aircraft were pressed into service by various Yugoslav factions during the early conflicts, when military aircraft were scarce and any flying platform had value. Cessna 210. Commanders and officials on multiple sides of the Yugoslav Wars used this high-performance light aircraft for liaison across the divided and rapidly changing front lines. Piper PA-18 Super Cub. Slovenian and Croatian forces used civilian light aircraft, including this type, for observation and courier missions during the 10-Day War and the Croatian War of Independence.